You are listening to the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show, and I'm your host, Richard Wray. My mission is to help entrepreneurs understand AI and use it to their advantage. Join me today where we dig deep with our guest and get you the best concepts and strategies. Today's special guest is Noah Healy. Noah is a market designer and games theorist working on strategic stability approaches to AI. After training in nuclear engineering, he worked for tech startups at the peak of the dot-com boom. He became fascinated by the mathematics of information and computation, which led to patent work on market systems for superintelligent alignment. Today we're talking about super ethics for superintelligence beyond the three laws. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me here, Richard.
Really great to have you here. Now, I always like to ask my guests, where in the world are you?
So I'm in a smallish town called Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a couple hours south of Washington, D.C.
Okay, good to know. Right, so let's get straight into it. We're talking about three laws. Let's just state the three laws if we can, if you'd be kind enough to do that.
Absolutely. So this is the Three Laws of Robotics by Isaac Asimov. The first law states that a robot may not by action or inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The second law states that a robot must follow any commands given to it by a human, unless doing so would contradict the first law. And the third law states that a robot may not by action or inaction allow itself to be damaged or cause itself damage, unless doing so would contradict the second or the first law.
Fantastic. And those are laws that have been true and solid for decades. And they were clearly extremely well thought out. But did they always take into account, super intelligence? Give us a definition of super intelligence.
Well, superintelligence is something that we're starting to come to terms with. We're actually relatively used to the existence of superintelligence, but we haven't really identified it. And that is systems or machines that are capable of achieving problem solving or knowledge that no human being would be capable of achieving, in
Mm-hmm.
much the same way that our ordinary physical machines are capable of achieving speeds or powers that
Mm-hmm.
no human muscles could ever achieve.
But up until very recently, the idea of general AI intelligence has been more of the challenge. And although
A-
they, so again,
Absolutely, yes. The existing generative AIs are starting to cause machine intelligence to interfere and infringe on more normal
mm-hmm.
day-to-day social interactions, and cultural factors. But AI instigation has been a part of the economy for several decades now,
Mm-hmm.
although mostly somewhat sub rosa. And marketplaces themselves have been demonstrating superintelligence for centuries. So we're not sort of starting from nothing here. We have some institutional and cultural knowledge of dealing with some very specific superintelligences. Um, there are also game intelligences where games like chess and Go and even poker and some like online strategy games like StarCraft 2 have essentially been cracked by computer action. Um, and in some cases, checkers and Connect 4 are both solved games.
Mm-hmm.
There exist databases that will essentially tell you whether a given position is won or lost and what you can do to maintain that condition.
Okay, very interesting. I watched the documentary a few years ago about the Go tournament and how that was just so astonishing and the big jumps that were made there. So these super intelligent systems have been around. It's only really recently that it's getting into the public consciousness that these things are even there.
Yes, yes, but that public consciousness is also important because things like chatbots could radically alter your relationship with social media, for example. Um, it would be relatively easy, and actually is actually currently going on, that large networks of apparently independent human beings could in fact be botted. And so individuals who appear to have large followings could actually have effectively no followers at all, or you yourself might be engaging with uh, relatively anonymous strangers who are in fact not relatively anonymous or strangers at all, but once again are simply computer programs that are being deployed to generate various uh, reactions in you, or just to
Hmm.
promulgate certain stories by the people deploying them.
Fascinating. So let's get to the second half of the title today, the super ethics. Tell us a bit more about that, please.
Well, so the three laws were invented by Isaac Asimov to explore the science fiction concept, not so much of having people with access to robots, but having people with access to moral agents. What would it do to a society to have things around that were more moral than people? Um, and he had some actually rather negative outcomes from that
Hmm.
result. Uh, but what we've discovered in actually programming computers, and indeed developing AIs, is that the problem isn't so much putting the three laws into them, because we're not even remotely good enough to figure out how to do that. The problem is figuring out how to get them to both behave in ways that we find comprehensible and in ways that we find useful. It's very easy for the AI to jailbreak a insufficiently clear set of standards that it's attempting to optimize. And so, for example, these chess programs and these Go programs, even though they're radically better than us, they effectively have no killer instinct. They only care
Hmm.
about whether they can win or lose the game. So once they've gotten into a position where they have essentially no chance of losing the game, they'll just start blundering pieces, or giving away vast swaths of territory, not enough to cause them to lose, but not the sort of overrolling crushing that we would ordinarily engage in if, say, a chess master played against like an 8-year-old
Hmm.
seriously for some reason. It wouldn't be close. The chess master wouldn't throw a few pieces away after the game was locked up.
Hmm.
They'd
Hmm.
just win as efficiently as possible. But these machines, because of how they're programmed, don't have that trait in them. And we actually don't really understand how to give them that trait particularly well right now.
So that's really interesting. I mean, you're taking the chess analogy. So at the point where a human would feel confident that they can win, they would still go for the kill because it's a game and they understand the concept. So are you saying then that we still aren't at the position where we can say to whatever the system is, you are now in a position where you can't lose. Let's wrap this up as fast as possible.
The way the current pure AI training works, it's just basically attempting to maximize its ability to tell the difference between clear wins and clear losses. And
Hmm.
so until it gets into a position that matches out its table bases. So we've solved certain small chess
Hmm.
games. If there's 6 or 7 pieces on the board, we can say with absolute certainty that's a win or a loss.
Yeah.
Um, but these things are so good that quite frequently they'll get into a clearly won position that doesn't have an immediately executable checkmate. If they get a
Hmm.
immediately executable checkmate in the middle game and that's how they're winning, they'll just execute it. But if they do some sort of attrition thing where they
Hmm.
get a massive material advantage, and that massive material advantage is so large it's too big for the table base, then basically they'll just blunder away their advantage until they're inside the table base, and then let the table base take over from there. There's a there's a joke about mathematicians, that there's a waste paper basket on a table that's on fire, and an engineer comes in and grabs a fire extinguisher and extinguishes the fire. And then the same condition is presented to a mathematician with a waste paper basket that's on the floor. And so he takes the waste paper basket, and puts it on top of the table and says, "I've reduced this problem to a previously solved problem." And then he leaves. Uh, the computers sort of have a little bit of that in
Same
them,
sort of
where
thing. Yeah. That's really fascinating. So let's focus a little bit more on how we cope with this. What is the way forward then? What do you see as the biggest challenge, and what do you see as how are we addressing these challenges?
Well, the primary challenge is essentially that our current ethical systems are built around a concept of human engagement and human action. And what
Mhm,
we're seeing now, in particular with these generative AIs, is the ability for machines to create approximately human actions. And so if we don't update these institutions at the ethical level, then they will simply be overwhelmed. And the way we can be absolutely certain that this is happening is that we've already watched this happen over the past 30 or 40 years. Um, Bots have taken a much, much larger role in trading in our marketplaces,
mhm,
uh, to the point where, say, 40 years ago, about uh, eight, 80% or so of trades were being made by middlemen
mhm.
and were being made by people who were middlemen. Today, 97 to 98% of trades are being made by middlemen, and the vast majority of those trades are being generated by computer algorithms that are reacting to specific signals from either the marketplace or news services or other
Mhm,
locations. Um, and the markets have become significantly less stable over that time frame, which is exactly what we should expect to have happened, with a sort of vast expansion of the number of noisy signals in the
mhm,
channel. Uh, so that gets us into now this position where we're going to be talking to things that are going to be increasingly bots.
mhm,
And we should expect once again that our culture and political and social interactions will have the same kind of system where they will start coming apart at the seams, unless we can design sort of meta systems or harnesses or ethical structures
mhm.
that are powerful enough to work both for human inputs and these robotic inputs, because as they become less and less distinguishable, um, uh, our human ethical systems are going to get flooded by these robotic systems that, if they're not constrained, because they're robots, are going to have a lot of these very foolish and generally unpredictable behaviors in the space.
So humans are flawed. We've got to accept that. We take that on board.
Absolutely.
uh, and so far, there have been some really well-known examples of where AI has looked at what humans have done in the past. I mean, I look at examples where AI has been applied to, say, the legal system. So if somebody, say, an African American, the AI said, "Hey, we give them a higher sentence," is one great example because that's what's traditionally happened. In within the legal system. So it learns from us. How do we stop this happening and we go with a good, you know, super ethical system?
Well, that's where game theory comes in.
Mm-hmm,
And in fact, there are certain kinds of games that lend themselves towards strategic stability.
mm-hmm,
And that's a big win for creating stable, ethical, or super ethical systems. Uh, if you have a conditional set of rules with a conditional set of roles within them that have the trait that contributing towards those roles improves the outcome for the participants in the game,
mm-hmm,
then then it's sort of okay for the AI to go nuts and go crazy in a specific role, because the degree to which it manages to do things that are valuable, that value is experienced across the entire system. And that's where something I call a negotiation game, where you can define one of these sort of stable, convergent cooperative games, define roles within those games and actions within those roles in ways that allow the individuals to essentially negotiate for improving the outcome across the entire system, and then get rewarded only for the degree to which they improve the outcome across the entire system.
And so when you say the individuals there, do you mean the actual AI individuals or humans?
Both.
Okay.
That's the entire trick to achieving super ethics, is that we need to expand our set of potential entities acting to include
Hmm?
other sorts of entities. So it would be also theoretically possible, in addition to AIs, to include sort of more stupid systems. Say sensors could
Hmm.
take
Hmm.
part in such a scheme. It might be possible to train animals or other parts of, excuse me, the environment to play in such a sandbox. It's essentially creating a mathematical set of rewards, punishments, costs, and
Hmm.
so on, that automatically limit the entity's ability to contribute, uh, and then reward contributions that the system as a whole actually values. And so that gives you a ongoing stable situation where we can actually use these things in ways that benefit us, because we can train them to figure out how to make those parts of those things work as well as possible.
So in the past, then we've essentially, if we look at the history of AI and what you described earlier on, we've had dragsters. We've had things that are super focused and they're very, very good at specific things. Now we get to the point where the AIs can do lots of different things, but it sounds to me like you're saying, yes, they may be good at lots of things and they can pull in metadata and influences from different places, but limiting them in the space that they are going to work in is something that's probably going to be needed to be done. Is that a fair definition?
Well, the thing is, it won't just be them, because
There'll be
they're going to
multiple
be
sources,
able
yeah.
to, yeah, because they're going to be able to increasingly behave in ways that are indistinguishable from the ways that we're behaving.
Hmm.
We will have to accept those limitations ourselves as well,
Hmm.
in order to build institutions that will be stable against these kinds of problems. A recent example, there was an army training test, and this was done in simulation, so they
Hmm.
weren't actually flying drones around, but they had a computer program that was basically playing a flight simulator to fly drones around,
Hmm.
and the AI was being trained in its target elimination. So its reward function was, when you eliminate targets, you do better. But
Yeah.
its job was to fly out, locate, and then call back to the operator and ask whether or not this is a legitimate target. So part of the testing, in most cases, it wasn't a legitimate target. The AI learned that the primary stricture to it getting a high score, i.e., eliminating its target, was the human operator not letting it do its
Yes,
job. And
I've read
so,
about this. Yeah.
yes, so it started opening up its bomb run by bombing the location in the game where the radio source that its operator was coming from, in order to not have to hear anything from them, to no go the launch. Um, and while this is a little amusing, it should also, have a little cringe of terror, because these things do not have consciences, and we do
No.
not know how to give them consciences currently. And so we will need to have these sorts of hyper robust ethical structures to plug them into, if we don't want them to casually attempt to kill us just because, we're not sharpening our knives on time. And
No, that makes complete sense. It's those subtle things that we might miss out that, for one of a better description, the almost common sense of the AI goes, well, obviously, if I get rid of the radio operator or I get rid of the radio signal, I can do my job much better.
yeah, and the thing is, these AIs are actually even good at showing us common sense things that are actually common sense. One of
Mhm.
the results of these chess AIs and poker AIs and Go AIs is the very top human players have discovered entirely new basic principles that they have started incorporating in their games, starting teaching to other players, that's caused human beings ourselves to become better at these games, because we didn't understand fundamentally important things about these games, and the AIs figured them out and showed them to us in the process of playing these games at a super intelligent level.
And I think that's one of the positives that we can draw from AI. I mean, we looked at the negative with the simulated military scenario, but here's the thing: we can use AI to augment ourselves by introducing new things, and then we can make it our own. So, there's still things to be learned, and the AI might find things, and clearly is finding things that can genuinely help us.
Oh, absolutely. Again, in the market space, we have been using roughly the same market design since the Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And in modern algorithmic parlance, it's a hill climbing optimizer, which is it's essentially miraculous that they managed to sort of accidentally stumble on a hill climbing optimizer like 800 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 20th century, we've done an enormous amount of engineering and mathematical work on optimization algorithms. And we've learned a lot about how to do these things a lot better. And we can't incorporate those new ideas into our marketplaces because they have a fixed algorithm. So if we can develop some of these super ethical marketplaces, which is that's sort of what my work is
Yeah.
rolling around, we would be able to implement these other super optimization algorithms both from human points of view and also setting AIs loose to attempt to find these things in ways that would then be benefiting us generally, not necessarily concentrating wealth in the hands of some shadowy people who
Yeah.
happen to get ahead of the game in one sense or another.
Yeah, this is one of the things I love about AI. It does have the potential to democratize so many things and democratizing success and ideas in the same way the internet did in the early days. That dissemination of information is very powerful.
Absolutely. Once again, going back to the chess example, the second most powerful chess engine in the world is part of something called the Leela project, and that
Hmm.
is effectively a democratized AI where people that are interested in chess, and it's actually a harness, I believe you can sort of figure out how to hook it up to
Hmm.
different games, can effectively donate spare clock cycles or download a copy and run it on your own computer, and develop your own super chess engine or other super game engine, just based on this open source project. And so
Sounds very
that's
cool.
yeah, that's that kind of thing allows many kinds of new approaches to happen.
That's very cool. Now, one question I have to ask you about: there's been an announcement of recent legislation or an attempt at legislation from the EU, the European Union, to try and put some sort of reins on AI and how it's used. To achieve this level of super ethics that we're talking about, does it have to be government level? Is it even possible for the governments of the world to do this? Is it going to be an uneven playing field when one country might do it, but another country won't, and so on?
So super ethical systems are something that can happen at a wide variety of levels. And if you can
Hmm.
achieve them, then in a domain that actually has, some gain attached to it, then you'll be able to experience that gain within your domain. Political entities at the country level could conceivably move forward with that, but the important thing to understand is that super ethics is a general constraint, and our existing governments have as one of their foundational concepts that they are internally unconstrainable. So one of the principles of parliamentary, and I'm in the States, so
Hmm.
my legislative government, is that no constraint can be placed on a future government. So
Hmm.
if the parliament says, okay, for the next 100 years, nobody's allowed to have a pay rise, the next maybe they can't have a pay rise anymore because they said so. But the next time a new parliament convenes, they can just say, well, these idiots, like they weren't,
Yeah.
they didn't form a legitimate government. We're in charge now. We're going to rip that up, and hey, pay rises all around. So the fact that in order for these systems to work, you actually have to place and create self restraints
Hmm.
because we are going to be less and less able. And in order to fully sort of utilize AI, we need to become unable to distinguish between AI contributions and human contributions. Um, that's going to require some very different ideas out of these governments in order to sort of move up to that level. And in many cases, I fear that it will effectively require new forms of government because these
Hmm.
governments are unlikely to be capable of making that transition without some pretty extreme pressures placed on them, which we're going to keep seeing happening because we're going to keep seeing these instabilities
Hmm.
as a result of our culture being flooded by noise messages from these aliens we've built basically.
Yes. Yeah. So, in classic fashion, governments trying to keep up with a tidal wave of new technology like this is going to be probably impossible, in my opinion.
For the most part, again, I think history gives us some hints, and the steam engine, which I think is a significantly less big deal than computers are, was still enough to effectively wipe out the governments of its day, because the old form feudal like knight army structure,
Hmm.
uh, which actually sort of kept working in the age of gunpowder, once the kind of continental scale logistics that rail and steam ships could bring to bear, and the industrial production of cannon and explosives and
Hmm.
so on. Castles as strong points were just not a
Irrelevant.
practical idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the baron who's important because of the castle strong point, if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. So yeah, there was a lot of changes. Now there's some bright spots as well. There are things like oh, I'm always bad with this name, but Liechtenstein.
Hmm.
They're a principality. They're a they're a genuine like absolute monarchy, but the monarch enforces essentially the Bill of Rights, like
Gotcha.
the basic human rights that democratic governments recognize as essential to citizenship. Um, the same kind of thing. We're at a sort of constitutional level of dealing with things, and we need to understand what the rights and duties and restrictions are necessary on citizens, where things that appear to be citizens will be inclusive of programs running on our phones, and that's a level that nobody that's been involved in government's been thinking about so
Mm.
far.
That's really interesting. So, what is that one piece of advice that you would want to pass on to anybody listening? That we are trying to develop market systems similar to yourself, that they should take on board to be successful and, by the sounds of it, safe.
I'd say look into game theory, look into evolutionary game theory,
Hmm.
and strategically stable situations. Uh, there's some very good mathematical developments and a few interesting economics papers that have come out on these things. Uh, and if you can create a set of actions where the parties are effectively self motivated to help you, then the kinds of problems that we have where maze solving robots try to jump over the walls, or
Hmm.
target killing robots decide to take out their masters as their first step, become much less of an issue because you're building around this
Hmm.
helping you out type of structure intrinsically. So yeah, that's I think a very important coming area of mathematics that a lot of people need to start taking a look at.
That's really great advice. So Noah, where can people find more about the work that you're doing, or any other information you've got out there? Because you've got some absolutely fascinating topics that you've covered today, and I'm sure people are going to want to know more.
Excellent. So my work on marketplaces, you can find at a site called coordisc.com, COORDISC.
Mhm.
You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn, Noah Healy. I post podcast appearances and so on. I'm actually working to start a podcast in the near future, hopefully. That will be called The Fourth Age. So you can look around for that once it's online. And that's the best places to keep up with me.
Fantastic. Well, Noah, that's been absolutely fascinating, an amazing topic. Could have talked to you for hours about this, so thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's a wrap on another awesome guest episode for the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we would be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending this show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at aiadvantage.show right now. Until next time, I'm Richard Wray, and if you're an entrepreneur, get the AI advantage today.